let's shift to gender. Obviously, gender is totally different than race because I'm 100% man, and any questioning of that is totally a big problem. But so that okay. So yeah, I think explain that distinction because I think obviously like race biologically is ludicrous because you're literally talking almost essentially like skin exposure to sun, right? Like this
Yeah.
is a ludicrous way of categorizing humans. With gender, there is this very basic distinction. And you talk about, the world as we see it and the world even as we might experience it in terms of our sexual desires and all these other things could not get any more sort of reified in that way than that. But explain that distinction between the biology and the sociology of gender and make that and explain that because obviously it is a lot more complicated.
Yeah, so with gender, I mean, it's pretty clear that gender as we know it is as a human institution that originates on some like basic ancestral level in biology and the fact that we're sort of in general sexually dimorphic as a species. And so maybe in past agrarian societies, there was some like it may have made sense to divide labor up, for example, in certain ways, to have men do field work and women do housework, or to have men be hunting and women gathering, or something of the kind. But it doesn't, there's this holdover from past way of doing things that associates that some of these roles are just kind of, in other words, it's a big leap to go from hunters and gatherers to women are should be domestic servants, right? And this is the naturalizing leap that people
Right,
go to,
right,
right, that want to
exactly.
make.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, and then you also made a distinction about how we can literally describe the physical and material properties. Like we know that estrogen and testosterone, as an example, do different things in people's bodies. But at
Yes.
the same time, but you made an analogy with gold as an example, as a currency. We can describe the literal physical properties of gold, could tell us some very basic and clear things, but it would not tell us how we design an economy. Can you tease out that analogy?
Yeah, so this then the purpose of the analogy is to show how a social construct is not necessarily something that's not real. So sometimes people will say, "Oh, gender is just a social construct; it's an illusion." Well, maybe in a sense it's an illusion, but like money or like gold, like these things that humans invent, they come to have reality to us, and they place very real constraints on the sorts of things that we can do. So even if gender as we know it is sort of socially constructed, well, it actually is part of our reality. It's just not, maybe that doesn't mean that it's inevitably the way that it currently is, but it is still a kind of real thing, and that like like the worth of money, it's something that has a really deep impact and effect and limitation on our lives.
And that it also draws the distinction between the sort of the material and biological precursors and realities, which of course can also be
Right.
shifted and mean different things for different people and can be adjusted with hormones. They can be, there's a million different ways these things manifest. But that, even as an example, saying like, hey, you could notice as an example, maybe a boy comes into the world, and even before there's some sense of social conditioning, they want to like climb trees or something, or, whatever, or try to play a
Yeah.
sport or engage in some sort of conflict. First of all, that does not mean, as an example, like all of one part of it is that all of those same impulses could be manifested in a million different ways, really positive or really negative, right? So that's one
Yeah.
part
Yeah.
of the conversation. And then the other part of the conversation is that that is also one end. And then maybe at another point, other desires emerge. And that also, is real to that person's expression. And neither of these two things, sociologically or biologically, is kind of fully explaining that. Does that make sense? Am I getting it right?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, when it comes to describing psychological differences between men and women or between boys and girls, yeah, there probably is some sort of genetic
Right.
psychological distinction. But these genetic differences are all their predispositions.
Right.
So that's a kind of abstract idea, but a predisposition can play out in any number of ways depending on the circumstances that you're in.
Right.
So again, maybe psychologists observe that children in our society prefer playing with truck. Boys prefer playing with trucks and girls prefer playing with dolls at a very early age. Perhaps, so let's grant that they find something like that. Okay. But when it comes to politics, then people want to draw this distinction to say that, oh, men are therefore suited to go work at the bank, and like women are suited to raise children, and the men shouldn't have to do that. And it's like all this stuff seems like there's just not an actual, there's not been an adequate causal connection established
Right.
from one of these things and the other. And there's a whole social, political, historical world that's not being taken into consideration when it comes to describing how these predispositions become actualized in a real situation.
So, a better way of describing it, and we're going to get to in a second, going out into making a broader case in the broader world. But when somebody comes and says, "Look, this stuff is biology, and you can like it or not like it, but I saw this footage of apes fighting together and it looks like judo and that's what dudes are. And there's a footage of a cheetah lioness or whatever the fuck. And she's primping herself and that's a chick and that's what it is. And don't come at me with your fucking, hippie college bullshit." Our response can be, instead of like, well, you're just being, a sexist who watches YouTube videos. Our response can be, okay, there's no doubt and no one denies that there are biological genetic precursors on some level of which we're in the literal infancy of studying. But we also have no doubt that there is generations and generations and generations of social historical conditioning of which we see actually very clearly. And instead of studying that is not in its infancy. It's actually a very well thought out and developed field. And we know that part. And so those two things are interacting. But what you're doing is you're vastly overstating the literal objective science of which is still contested and in flux and in play, while totally discounting a whole other body of material just because, ironically, if we want to play into these, probably overall, you're emotionally uncomfortable with it, to be blunt about it. So do you see what I mean? Instead of like responding with the accusation, we can actually go deeper and say, well, here's the reality of the biology as it is kind of scientifically constituted now as far as we know. And then you're dismissing a whole other massive realm of reality because it doesn't fit with your comfort zone.
Yeah, so I mean, for one thing, I would say to that person, like humans are not gorillas or lions. And we have, if you want to talk about biology, we have extraordinarily flexible brains that can
Right.
do all kinds of things that we never had no evolutionary precedent for. I mean, humans, we play the piano, we record podcasts, we form elaborate economic and political systems. Like none of this really we're genetically predisposed to do. Specifically,
Right.
It's that we merely have this incredibly flexible potential in the form of our elaborate plastic brains that lets us kind of, reinvent ourselves culturally.
Right.
And so to look at other ape species, for instance, and try to suggest that humans are just stuck doing this again and again, it only seems to get brought up when someone is resistant to changing some aspect of our current society.
Right.
Then suddenly the lions come out, but no one says that. Well, you don't see bonobos using smartphones. Well, that doesn't mean we shouldn't use them.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the other thing too, is like, if that's really the like you see these people, like, some people advocate a paleo diet, which I think actually
Right.
has some good ideas, but it's like, guys, like this is not, your stainless steel pan-seared
Yeah.
Whole Foods steak is not paleo.
Yeah, I mean,
Right,
this is
like, you need to
it's an
be a
updated
little-
Atkins diet, but the notion
Right.
that what we're doing is, this is just a hunter-gatherer diet. Well,
No.
not really.
No,
Yeah.
exactly. Like, if you
Yeah.
want to be the cheetah, then eat the flies and live without the electricity.
Yeah.
Right.
Hi, folks. Sam Seder here. We still need your help on our Patreon page. YouTube ads have come back, but not nearly as much as we had before. So if you can help us out, any little bit helps. Head over to our Patreon page right at this URL, and you'll help us keep helping you by making videos